Late autumn, 1944. Deep inside a forested ridge in central Germany, floodlights cut through mist as armed guards seal steel doors behind a descending elevator. Below ground, engineers work in silence, surrounded by concrete walls thick enough to survive a direct airstrike. Blueprints are locked away, test data is fragmented. Even senior Wehrmacht officers are denied full access. This is not secrecy imposed by enemy threat alone. It is secrecy born of distrust. Adolf Hitler has ordered that this weapon, one he believes could reverse Germany's collapse, remain hidden, not only from Allied intelligence, but from his own generals, men he no longer fully trusts. Outside, the war tightens its grip, and inside these tunnels, desperation takes shape in steel and flame. That fear, and the weapon it produced, had been building for years. By late 1944, Nazi Germany stood on the edge of collapse. In the West, Allied armies had broken out of Normandy, liberated Paris, and pushed relentlessly toward the Rhine. In the East, the Red Army had shattered Army Group Center and now loomed at the borders of East Prussia. German cities burned nightly under sustained strategic bombing. Fuel stocks were exhausted. Trained pilots were scarce. Factories lay in ruins. Yet Adolf Hitler refused to accept strategic reality. Rather than authorize withdrawal or negotiated settlement, he doubled down on the belief that a single decisive weapon could reverse Germany's fortunes. This belief had deep roots. Since 1942, Hitler had increasingly placed faith in so-called Wunderwaffen miracle weapons, technological projects meant to compensate for dwindling manpower and material. The V-1 flying bomb and the V-2 ballistic missile had already entered service, striking London and Antwerp. They inflicted terror, but not decision. Still, Hitler interpreted their existence as proof that technological surprise could restore initiative. He pushed scientists and engineers toward ever more ambitious designs, often bypassing the traditional military chain of command. This obsession grew alongside Hitler's paranoia. After the failed July 20th assassination attempt in 1944, his trust in the Wehrmacht leadership collapsed. He became convinced that generals leaked information, sabotaged projects, or lacked the ideological will to fight to the end. As Germany's military situation worsened, secrecy tightened not just against the Allies, but inward, against his own officers. That climate of fear and isolation set the conditions for a weapon unlike any Germany had attempted before, and for a development process driven as much by mistrust as by necessity. Hidden beneath mountains, forests, and repurposed mines, Germany's most secret weapons programs accelerated during the war's final year. Facilities like Peenemünde, Nordhausen, and a network of underground complexes across the Thuringia and the Harz Mountains became centers of feverish activity. Slave labor from Mittelbau-Dora worked under brutal conditions, assembling components in tunnels carved deep into rock. Among these projects were jet aircraft, long-range rockets, and advanced guided munitions. But one initiative stood apart not for its size, but for the level of personal control Hitler exerted over it. Information was compartmentalized. Engineers saw only fragments. Commanders received vague briefings. Even Albert Speer, Reich Minister for Armaments, later admitted he was excluded from key decisions. The weapon in question promised unprecedented destructive potential if completed. Its designers claimed it could strike targets at extreme range, evade interception, and shatter enemy morale. Hitler saw it as both a military tool and a symbol of final assertion of German technological dominance. Yet secrecy came at a cost. Without coordination, production stalled. Without integration into operational planning, deployment remained theoretical. Field commanders were unprepared to use it effectively, and logistics officers lacked the fuel, transport, or infrastructure to support it. As Allied forces closed in, the weapon's development became a race against time, conducted in shadows and silence. The stage was set for a story shaped not only by engineering brilliance, but by fear, fragmentation, and a leadership increasingly cut off from reality. Those pressures now converged on the man tasked with turning Hitler's last hidden hope into something that could actually change the course of the war. By late 1943, Adolf Hitler's leadership had narrowed into fixation. Conventional armies had failed him, trusted generals had disappointed him. In their place, he placed faith in technology, not strategy, not maneuver machines. This weapon was shielded not just from enemy intelligence, but from his own command structure. Orders flowed downward without explanation. Questions were treated as disloyalty. What began as secrecy became isolation. The more advanced the weapon became, the harder it was to produce reliably at scale. Inside underground workshops, engineers faced a moral and professional crisis. Many understood the weapon's limitations. Some warned it would arrive too late. Others feared catastrophic failure, rushed into service, yet dissent carried consequences. Careers ended quietly, transfers followed questions. Silence became survival. The result was a program advancing rapidly on paper, but unevenly in reality. Test results were filtered. Failures were framed, successes exaggerated. The weapon moved closer to completion, but further from practical battlefield integration. And as these internal fractures widened, the enemy was already closing in, forcing the project toward a moment of reckoning it could no longer avoid. For a time, Allied intelligence struggled to fully grasp what Germany was building. Reconnaissance photos showed strange launch sites along the French coast. Prisoner interrogations hinted at a new terror weapon, but details were fragmented. Hitler's secrecy bought him time yet not understanding. By mid-1944, Allied analysts began assembling the picture. Test launches were tracked, wreckage was recovered. Scientists in Britain realized the implications with alarm: a ballistic missile, supersonic, impossible to intercept once launched. There would be no warning sirens, no fighter interception, no defense. But intelligence also revealed a critical flaw. These weapons consumed vast resources for limited strategic return. Each launch required immense effort. Each missile carried a conventional warhead incapable of decisive destruction. The Allies understood something: Hitler refused to accept the weapon could terrorize, but not turn the war. Hitler imagined the weapon as a war winner. In reality, it was detached from battlefield needs. It did not support ground forces. It did not stop Allied air superiority. It did not disrupt logistics at scale. It struck cities, not armies. Worse still, its deployment drained Germany's final reserves. Steel, fuel, skilled labor, and transportation were consumed by a project that offered no defensive value. German generals quietly recognized the imbalance. Tanks lacked fuel, infantry lacked ammunition. Aircraft sat grounded. Yet the missile program remained protected and touchable by criticism. The weapon existed in its own strategic universe, immune to the collapsing reality around it. As Germany's situation deteriorated, secrecy became a liability. Field commanders were not briefed. Air defense units were not integrated. Even senior officers learned of launches after they occurred. Coordination vanished. When the weapon finally entered operational use, it did so without synergy. Launch crews operated in isolation. Targets were selected politically, not militarily. The result was shock without strategy, fear without leverage. By the time the first impacts were felt in Allied cities, the front lines were already moving inexorably toward Germany itself. The weapon had arrived, but history had moved past it. And with that collision between expectation and reality, the story now converges on the moment Hitler had waited for: the weapon's first true test. September 8, 1944, 1843 hours. The evening sky over London is calm. No sirens sound. No radar warning flashes across control rooms. Civilians move through streets already hardened by years of bombing, unaware that something entirely new is descending from the upper edge of the atmosphere. Without warning, the explosion comes. A detonation tears through Chiswick, flattening buildings, rupturing gas mains, hurling debris across entire blocks. There is no aircraft overhead, no anti-aircraft fire, no interception. Only shock, sudden, total, incomprehensible. In Germany, Adolf Hitler is informed within hours. His long-promised weapon has finally struck the enemy homeland. The V-2 Rocketaggregat 4 has entered combat. At launch sites in the Netherlands, mobile crews work under camouflage nets, racing against Allied air patrols. The process is complex and unforgiving. Liquid oxygen must be handled with precision. Gyroscopes aligned, guidance systems calibrated. Each launch is a gamble. When the engines ignite, the missile rises vertically, trailing fire and smoke. Within minutes, it climbs beyond the reach of fighters, beyond flak, accelerating past the speed of sound. It arcs into space then falls. The weapon cannot be stopped. Over the following days, more launches follow. London, Antwerp, Liege. Each impact arrives without warning, detonating with brutal force. Allied civilians are shaken. Medical services are overwhelmed. The psychological effect is immediate. Hitler is convinced this is the turning point he has awaited. But behind the spectacle, the numbers tell a colder story. Each missile requires resources Germany no longer has in abundance. Factories labor under bombing. Fuel shortages worsen. Transport networks are collapsing. The missile's accuracy is limited, striking cities broadly, not precisely. German generals watch the reports carefully. Casualties are real. Fear is real. But Allied armies do not slow. Ports remain operational. Supply lines continue to flow. The Western Front does not pause. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence responds with speed. Mobile units relocate constantly, launching and vanishing before Allied aircraft can respond. On paper, it is exactly the kind of weapon Hitler envisioned: unstoppable, terrifying, immune to interception. Yet the battlefield reality is unforgiving. Each launch consumes enormous effort. Specialized fuel, precision-machined parts, highly trained crews, entire rail shipments are required to deliver a single operational missile. And Germany, now fighting on collapsing fronts east and west, cannot sustain the burden. In London and Antwerp, explosions continue, but they fail to alter the strategic rhythm of the war. Allied troop movements proceed. Supplies flow through ports faster than rockets can destroy them. Morale is shaken, but not broken. Civilians understand something crucial. There is no warning because there is no bomber. The fear is sharp but finite. Inside the German high command, confidence fractures. Albert Speer studies production figures and casualty reports. The cost per impact is staggering. Thousands of forced laborers are dying underground at Mittelwerk to produce weapons that cannot stop Allied tanks already crossing Germany's borders. Field commanders plead for aircraft, fuel, and artillery resources being siphoned into rockets that cannot defend ground held by infantry. Even as Hitler demands increased launches, the fronts collapse faster than the V can compensate. By November, Allied forces overrun key launch zones. The Netherlands becomes contested ground. Mobile units are destroyed, supply lines severed. Production sites are bombed relentlessly, rail yards vanish under rubble. Missiles sit incomplete as electricity fails and components go missing. The secret weapon is running out of time. The final launches come sporadically. Some rockets malfunction, others miss entirely. A weapon designed to change the war has become a symbol of desperation, powerful, terrifying, but strategically hollow. When the last V strikes fall in March 1945, Allied armies are already deep inside Germany. The Rhine has been crossed, the Reich is collapsing from within. Hitler retreats further into isolation, still believing the weapon arrived too late, not that it was never decisive. The truth is harsher. The V2 was a technological marvel unmatched in its era. But war is not won by terror alone. It is won by logistics, coordination, and sustained force. And in that contest, the rocket, despite its speed and power, could not reverse reality. What remains now is the aftermath of a weapon that changed history's future, while failing to change its present. When the V campaign ended, the physical damage was measurable, but the strategic outcome was unmistakable. Between September 1944 and March 1945, more than 3,000 V rockets were launched against Allied cities, primarily London and Antwerp. They killed an estimated 7,000 civilians and soldiers. Entire streets vanished in seconds. Craters swallowed buildings whole, yet the war did not slow. Allied port throughput at Antwerp continued to increase. Armies advanced across France, through the Low Countries, and into the German heartland without meaningful disruption. No divisions were delayed, no offensives cancelled, no supply lines permanently broken. German post-war assessments quietly acknowledged the truth. The V2 inflicted terror, not paralysis. The human cost, however, extended far beyond the impact zones. At Mittelwerk, where rockets were assembled underground. Forced laborers, many from Dora-Mittelbau concentration camp, worked in darkness, toxic fumes, and starvation. More people died building the V2 than were killed by it in combat. This fact alone stripped the weapon of any moral justification, even among some German engineers. Allied intelligence officers, entering the captured facilities in April 1945, found half-finished missiles, abandoned machinery, and documents scattered in haste. The program had collapsed not through a single blow, but through exhaustion of manpower, materials, and time. For civilians who endured the attacks, the silence that followed was unsettling. No warning sirens, no bombers overhead, just absence. And with it, the realization that the terror had ended not because it worked but because Germany could no longer sustain it. The war moved forward relentlessly, leaving the rocket behind, and as the fighting ended, a new question emerged, one that would shape the decades to come. What happens when such a weapon falls into victorious hands? In the ruins of the Third Reich, the V2 did not disappear, it was claimed. As Allied forces advanced, teams raced not only for territory, but for knowledge. Operation Paperclip brought Wernher von Braun and key members of his engineering staff into American custody. In the East, Soviet units dismantled entire facilities, transporting hardware and specialists back across their borders. What Hitler had tried to keep hidden was now divided between rival powers. Within years, the V2's legacy reshaped the post-war world. Its propulsion systems, guidance concepts, and structural designs became the foundation of both the American and Soviet missile programs. The same technology that had fallen silently on London would one day lift satellite sand weapons into orbit. Yet the weapon's wartime lesson endured. The V2 proved that technological brilliance could not compensate for strategic isolation, moral collapse, or industrial imbalance. It arrived too late, it consumed resources Germany could not spare, and it failed to alter the outcome it was meant to prevent. For historians and soldiers alike, the V2 became a cautionary symbol. Innovation without integration, power without purpose. A weapon designed to terrify rather than decide. The Third Reich had bet its future on secrecy and shock. In the end, it achieved neither, and from that realization emerges the final reflection, one that reaches beyond Germany, beyond the war itself. The story of Hitler's secret weapon reveals a timeless truth about war: innovation alone cannot dictate victory. The V2, with its unmatched speed and destructive potential, symbolized ingenuity pushed to extremes, but it arrived too late, too isolated, and too uncoordinated to change the fate of a collapsing regime. It demonstrated the limits of fear as a strategic tool and the consequences of hiding knowledge even from one's own commanders. Yet its legacy endured, propelling humanity into the space age and shaping modern missile technology. In the end, the V2 reminds us that progress, courage, and strategy must align, not just power and secrecy, to leave a lasting mark on history. If you found this cinematic recounting of World War II innovations compelling, subscribe for more detailed, historically grounded documentaries uncovering the human and technological stories behind the battles that shaped the modern world.